when you were 7 years old, your father went off to prison, convicted of murder. Tell me how you feel today, what the story is today.
Ever thought about the spooky side of being famous? Even though celebrities seem to live flashy and cool lives, still, these famous people sometimes end up crossing paths with really bad people, like meeting them in jail or going through tragic stuff with their families.
Ashton Kutcher taking the stand, testifying against a man accused of being a Hollywood serial killer.
We're about to spill the beans on 10 stars who had some creepy encounters with folks who turned out to be killers. So, take note, being famous isn't always sunshine and rainbows, and not all meetings with fans are safe and sound. Number 10. Ashton Kutcher. Ashton Kutcher, a famous actor, accidentally stumbled upon a horrifying scene. A murder had just taken place, and the perpetrator was still at large. This wasn't a movie script. It was real life. Michael Gargiulo, known as the Hollywood Ripper, was responsible for this heinous crime. Kutcher, known for his roles in movies and TV shows, played a crucial role in ensuring that Gargiulo faced justice for his crimes. Gargiulo wasn't your average person. He had a job fixing heating and air conditioning systems, but there was something dark lurking beneath the surface. He had a tendency to lose his temper quickly and was known to be aggressive. Despite leading a seemingly ordinary life, Gargiulo had a chilling secret. He was a horrifying killer. It all started back in 1993 when a young woman named Trisha Pacaccio was brutally killed outside her home. Gargiulo, who knew her through a friend, was suspected of the crime, but there wasn't enough evidence to charge him. He left his hometown of Chicago and moved to Los Angeles, hoping to evade suspicion. In Los Angeles, Gargiulo became fixated on his neighbor, Ashley Ellerin. He would show up uninvited at her house, often at odd hours of the night. One fateful night, Ashton Kutcher, who had recently met Ellerin, planned to take her out on a date. He called her to confirm their plans, but got no response. When he arrived at her house later that evening, he noticed what looked like fresh stains on the carpet, but assumed she had left because he was running late. Little did he know, Ellerin had already fallen victim to Gargiulo's violence. Kutcher's visit to Ellerin's house inadvertently drew attention to Gargiulo, leading the police to investigate him further. With the help of law enforcement from Chicago, they collected DNA samples from Gargiulo, which matched evidence from Pacaccio's case. Despite this damning evidence, it wasn't enough to convict him. Gargiulo continued his spree of terror, targeting more unsuspecting victims. Maria Bruno was one of his victims, but she managed to survive his attack. His DNA was found at the crime scene, linking him to the crime. Eventually, Gargiulo was apprehended with incriminating evidence in his possession. The legal process dragged on for over a decade due to various delays, including Gargiulo's frequent changes in legal representation. Kutcher testified during the trial, but his testimony didn't provide any groundbreaking revelations. Despite the challenges, Gargiulo was eventually found guilty of his crimes. However, the journey to justice was far from over. The COVID-19 pandemic caused further delays in Gargiulo's sentencing. Despite California's ban on capital punishment, he was ultimately sentenced to death. There's a possibility that he may face additional charges for perpetrating Pacaccio's death, as he claimed to have left his DNA in numerous homes due to his job. Thanks to Kutcher's inadvertent involvement and the diligent work of law enforcement, justice was served, but the scars left by Gargiulo's actions will linger for a long time. Number 9. Debbie Harry. Debbie Harry, the lady who sings in Blondie, told a story in her book called Face It, released in 2019. She shared about a scary time she had with a man named Ted Bundy, the renowned serial killer. This happened back in the 1970s before Debbie became a big deal. One night, Debbie was in New York City, trying to find a taxi. Then, a man in a white car offered her a ride. She wasn't sure if she should go with him, but her feet hurt a lot, and the man seemed friendly. So, she got into the car. But soon, she realized something was wrong. Somehow, she managed to get away from him. Many years later, she saw a picture of Ted Bundy in a magazine. When she saw his face, she remembered the scary night in New York. However, people said Bundy was in a different place at that time, not in New York. But Debbie remembers things about the car that match what Bundy drove. For example, the door handle was missing, just like in Bundy's car. Debbie was quite lucky to have escaped the infamous criminal who took the lives of several young women, leaving behind a trail of devastation. Debbie also talked about this scary time with an artist named Robert Williams. He made a picture called Debbie Harry's Fears, based on what she said. In the picture, there's a cartoon of Debbie trapped in a triangle shape, which represents her fear. Number 8. Charles Harrelson, dad of Woody Harrelson. Charles Harrelson, the dad of Woody Harrelson, was a serious criminal. Back in the early 1960s, when Charles Harrelson was still in his 20s, he started committing various petty crimes like stealing and hurting people. He even became a hired assassin and took the lives of many innocent people, often using a rifle instead of a regular gun. At his last trial, the prosecution revealed Charles Harrelson made everyone he met feel bad. Woody, who became famous for being on a television show called Cheers in the 1980s, didn't spend much time with his dad when he was little. He was only 7 years old when his dad was found guilty of his first murder. But as he got older, they started to spend time together, and Woody visited him in jail. On September 1st, 1980, near a place called Van Horn in Texas, the police were in a standoff with a guy they thought was a criminal and maybe even someone who killed people. That guy was Charles Void Harrelson. Charles Harrelson was acting crazy because he was high on drugs. He thought there were explosives hidden in his car's muffler. He stopped his car on the side of the road and started hitting it, which made the tire go flat. He didn't have a shirt on, and he was wearing shorts and gold chains. He held himself hostage with a weapon under his chin. He said he was going to take his life, and even claimed he was the one who assassinated John F. Kennedy. He was put in jail in 1973, but they let him out after 5 years because of his good behavior. Then, in 1981, he got 2 life sentences for taking the life of a judge named John H. Wood Jr., who was the first federal judge to be targeted in the 20th century. Woody told a magazine called People, "It might seem weird to say this about someone who was in trouble with the law, but my dad is one of the smartest and most charming people I've ever met. But I'm still figuring out if I should stick by him or be friends with him. To me, he seems more like someone I could be friends with rather than just my dad." Number 7. Kelsey Grammer. Almost 50 years ago, Kelsey Grammer's little sister, Karen Grammer, was brutally killed at the age of 18. Kelsey, who is in his late 60s, still feels the pain of losing her deeply even today. When Kelsey talks about the incident, he remembers a sentence he wrote for a book he's working on. It was ancient grief that is forever fresh. At that time, Kelsey was 20 years old and studying acting at Juilliard in New York. Karen, fresh out of high school, had moved to Colorado Springs to work at a Red Lobster restaurant while waiting for her boyfriend to finish his shift. Tragically, she was kidnapped by some men planning to rob the restaurant. Instead, they tortured her and took her life. One of the killers, Michael Corbett, died in prison in 2019. The other, Freddie Glenn, was involved in a series of crimes and killings. He and Corbett first took the life of a man leaving his job, then kidnapped and killed another soldier, and later kidnapped Karen from the Red Lobster, where she worked. Glenn was sentenced to death, but changes to Colorado's laws meant he could be eligible for parole after serving 10 years. Kelsey's daughter, Spencer, who stars with him in a Christmas movie, says it's awful for her dad to know that Karen's killer might be released one day. Glenn comes up for parole every few years, and Kelsey has to speak against him each time. Spencer explains how difficult it is for her father to go through this repeatedly. She also points out that there's not enough information for victims' families about when killers might be released. which adds to their pain. Spencer believes her father will never fully recover from losing Karen. Kelsey had faced other tragedies before Karen's death. When he was 13, his father was shot by a trespasser. 5 years after Karen died, his half-brothers Billy and Stephen died while scuba diving, with Stephen's death suspected to be from a shark attack. Kelsey admits that he used alcohol and drugs to cope with his pain during his younger years. Despite these hardships, Kelsey finds happiness in his family and maintains his faith in God. He's now happily married to Kate Walsh and cherishes his role as a father to 3 young children. He's thankful for the love in his life and remains committed to his work, with a reboot of the show Frasier in the works. Number 6. Travis Hallman. Travis Hallman's wife shared on Instagram something shocking from Travis's childhood. She said Travis was looked after by someone who later turned out to be a very dangerous person, a serial criminal known as the I-5 killer. This criminal, whose real name is Randall Woodfield, is from Oregon. He's connected to the deaths of 18 people, although he only got convicted for 1 murder and 1 attempted murder. Some people believe he might have taken the lives of up to 44 people. His crime spree occurred within 5 months, starting in 1980. During this time, he attacked both strangers and people he knew while traveling along Interstate 5 in the Pacific Northwest. Before this spree, Woodfield had been involved in terrible acts for more than 10 years. When he was a teenager, he got caught for spying on people, but his record was wiped clean when he turned 18. While he was in college, he got in trouble for breaking into his ex-girlfriend's place, but he got off because there wasn't enough proof. Later, he went to Portland State University, where he was a star player on the football team. Travis remembers how admired Woodfield was at that time. Even though he was seen as a sports hero, Woodfield had a darker side. He used to babysit Travis and his sister, along with another player from the team. Travis remembers having fun with them because they were athletes and energetic. However, Woodfield's bad behavior didn't stop. While he was at college, he got arrested multiple times for exposing himself in public and was convicted twice. Despite this, he was drafted into the National Football League but got cut because of suspicions about his indecent behavior. After leaving the National Football League, Woodfield's crimes got worse. He started robbing and harming women and was finally arrested in 1975. Despite getting sentenced to 10 years, he only served 4 and was released in 1979. Soon after, he took the life of his first known victim, Cherie Ayers, starting his killing spree along the interstate. He attacked 2 women in Oregon, killing one and injuring the other, but the survivor identified him to the police. He got sentenced to life in prison for those crimes. In prison, Woodfield was connected to more crimes through forensic evidence. When Travis found out about Woodfield's crimes, he was shocked, especially because his mom thought Woodfield was a nice person. Now, Travis and his wife are very careful about who they let watch their kids. Number 5, Dennis Wilson. Dennis Wilson, one of the founding members of the Beach Boys, found himself in a harrowing situation after becoming entangled with Charles Manson's dangerous circle. Manson's group completely overturned Dennis's life, taking over his home and his finances, and causing him immense trouble. It all started in 1968 when the Beach Boys released their single, Bluebirds Over the Mountain. On the flip side of that record was a seemingly innocent song titled Never Learn Not to Love, which was actually penned by Charles Manson, infamous for his involvement in a criminal cult. Dennis Wilson's encounter with Manson's followers, Patricia and Ella, began innocuously enough when he offered them a ride. Intrigued by their discussions on spirituality and shared interests in meditation and the Maharishi, Dennis welcomed them into his home. Little did he know that they would soon be joined by Manson himself, whom Dennis affectionately referred to as the Wizard. Dennis became deeply fascinated by Manson and even entertained the idea of having the Beach Boys join Manson's cult. Thankfully, his bandmates were not on board with the idea. Nevertheless, Dennis hosted a dinner party at his house, attended by his bandmates and Manson's followers. The atmosphere was unconventional, with most guests opting to be without clothes and indulging in deviant acts. Sensing the escalating danger, one of Dennis's bandmates, Mike Love, retreated from the scene, only to be confronted by Manson, who warned him against leaving the group. As if the situation wasn't troubling enough, Dennis found himself financially supporting Manson's life, paying the bills for their basic necessities, and even covering medical expenses for them. The Manson family's disregard for his belongings extended to the destruction of his cars and the theft of his possessions. Despite these losses, Dennis seemed okay, perhaps swayed by Manson's offer of adoring young women catering to his every whim. However, tensions escalated when Manson discovered that Dennis had taken credit for rewriting Manson's song, "Never Learn Not to Love." Enraged by this betrayal, Manson issued threats against Dennis and his family, leaving him in a state of constant fear and paranoia. Dennis attempted to distance himself from Manson's influence, but Manson's presence persisted, haunting Dennis even after he shifted to a new home. Dennis eventually found the courage to confront Manson, engaging in a physical altercation that freed him from Manson's grip. Despite his newfound freedom, Dennis remained haunted by guilt over his association with Manson, particularly in light of the heinous crimes committed by Manson and his followers, including the infamous helter-skelter killings. This burden of guilt weighed heavily on Dennis until his death in 1983, leaving behind a legacy marked by his ill-fated entanglement with Charles Manson's cult. Number 4. Clifton Dwayne Bloomfield. Born in March 1969, Clifton Dwayne Bloomfield is an American criminal. He was found guilty of taking the lives of 5 people in Albuquerque, New Mexico, from 2005 to 2008. Shockingly, during this time, he even had a small role as an extra in Hollywood. Bloomfield grew up in Kingman, Arizona. He got in trouble with the law for the first time in 1979 when he was still a kid. This happened after he had a problem with a gun. A judge told him he had to be on probation until he turned 18 and also go to a special home for kids in Tucson. When he got out of there, he went back home to his parents. They thought he was mean and made him go to therapy. They even gave him a medicine called mesoridazine to help with schizophrenia. But Clifton kept doing bad things. When he was just 13, he stole a motorcycle and then broke into a church. In 1989, he and his sister committed a bunch of petty crimes in Phoenix. Because of that, he was sent to prison for a long time. He finally got out in 2002. One night in October 2005, Clifton went to a Fuddruckers restaurant in Albuquerque. After he left, a man named Carlos Esquivel started talking to him. Carlos was gay, but Clifton wasn't. Still, he went along with Carlos to his apartment. But when they got there, Clifton attacked Carlos and took his life. Then he looked around the apartment for valuable things and left. Hours later, someone found Carlos's body. A few days later, on October 27th, Clifton found a house with its back door open. He went inside and looked around. He found some jewelry and took it. But then Josephine Selvage, the old lady who lived there, tried to stop him. Clifton fought her and took her life too. He left without taking anything else. The police thought maybe the 2 deaths were connected because they happened so close together, but they were wrong. 2 months later, Clifton robbed an old couple at gunpoint in Los Ranchos. Then he asked his girlfriend to marry him. But not long after, the police caught him for the robbery. He went to jail for 18 months. After he got out, Clifton got a job as a movie extra. He even worked on the set of a movie called Felon. He said he was also in a famous TV show called Breaking Bad. But Clifton didn't stop doing bad things. In December 2007, he broke into a house and killed an old man named Tak Yi and his wife. Then, he got someone else to help him take the life of a man named Manny. But they ended up targeting the wrong person. Clifton and his friend got caught and went to jail for a long time. In the end, Clifton admitted to all the bad things he did and was sentenced to spend 195 years in prison. Number 3. Bert Reynolds. Back in 1964, Los Angeles was scared stiff by a serial killer. This person took the lives of 9 people creepily, putting them next to cups of blood and surrounding the bodies with salt. The bodies had strange marks on them, like from some kind of ritual. Then, the killings suddenly stopped. But 10 years later, in 1974, the nightmare began again. A 46-year-old guy died in the same spot as one of the earlier victims. But what does Bert Reynolds have to do with any of this? Well, for a while, dead bodies kept turning up every few days. Then the routine changed. 2 guys were attacked in their house in Hollywood, but they managed to fight off the attacker. As the assailant fled, he ended up at Bert Reynolds' place. He dropped a letter there which had the name Vaughn Greenwood on it. The police caught Greenwood shortly after that. Reynolds got pulled into the legal mess too. He had to testify in court against Greenwood. The guy got nailed for attacking the 2 men and for killing 9 people. The judge decided he should spend his life in prison and never get a chance for parole. The judge said Greenwood would be dangerous anywhere he went. Here's the twist. Some people talk about the Greenwood case as an example of how profiling can go wrong. The police didn't catch Greenwood because they were smart. It was more like luck involving Bert Reynolds and a dropped letter. Number 2. Jean Leroy Hart. The brutal murder of 3 young Girl Scouts during a camping trip in 1977 deeply shocked their small Oklahoma community. The incident sparked a thorough investigation that ultimately led to the arrest of a local criminal named Jean Leroy Hart. Despite being identified as a suspect, Hart was later found not guilty by a jury. However, recent DNA evidence still points towards his involvement, leaving many lingering uncertainties about the tragic deaths of Lori Lee Farmer, Michelle Heather Goose, and Doris Denise Milner. These 3 girls had been looking forward to enjoying 2 weeks of outdoor fun at Camp Scott, along with their fellow Girl Scouts. Instead, their lives were cut short on June 13, 1977, when their bodies were discovered not far from their tent. They had been tortured and strangled, a horrifying discovery that triggered an extensive manhunt resulting in Hart's arrest. Investigators initially believed that a single hair found at the crime scene linked Hart to the victims. Hart had previously escaped from a local jail and had a history of convictions for abuse, kidnapping, and burglary. However, despite the hair possibly belonging to someone of Native American descent, like Hart, he was acquitted by the jury during his trial. After his clearing, Hart returned to prison to serve out his prior sentence and passed away while incarcerated in 1979. The unresolved nature of the case continues to weigh heavily on those connected to it. Actress Kristin Chenoweth, who grew up in the area where some of the Girl Scouts resided, feels a personal connection to the tragedy. She was originally meant to be on the camping trip, but stayed home because she was sick. Reflecting on how easily she could have been one of the victims, Chenoweth has dedicated herself to seeking justice and closure for the families affected by the assassinations. Chenoweth's involvement in shedding light on this dark chapter of Oklahoma's history is driven by her profound sense of responsibility to honor the memory of the girls and provide solace to their loved ones. Number 1. Mark David Chapman. Mark David Chapman, born on May 10, 1955, killed the English musician John Lennon in New York City on December 8, 1980. He shot Lennon 4 times from behind with a Charter Arms undercover .38 special revolver as Lennon entered his apartment building, the Dakota, on the Upper West Side. Lennon died upon arrival at Roosevelt Hospital. Chapman didn't run away or resist when the police came. Chapman grew up in Decatur, Georgia. He liked the Beatles, but grew angry at Lennon's wealthy lifestyle and some of his public statements. These included Lennon's comment about the Beatles being more popular than Jesus. and the lyrics of songs like God and Imagine. Chapman also admired the character Holden Caulfield from the book The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger and wanted to live like him. He even thought about taking the lives of other famous people like David Bowie, Johnny Carson, Elizabeth Taylor, Paul McCartney, and Ronald Reagan. Chapman had never been in trouble with the law before and had recently quit his job as a security guard in Hawaii. After Lennon's death, Chapman's lawyers planned to argue that he was insane at the time of the shooting. They had mental health experts ready to testify, but Chapman decided to plead guilty because he believed it was what God wanted. The judge agreed that Chapman was fit to stand trial. He was sentenced to at least 20 years in prison, with the condition that he would get mental health treatment. Chapman didn't talk to the press for 6 years after going to prison. Later, he said he was sorry for taking the life of Lennon and didn't want people to think he did it for fame. He eventually gave taped interviews to journalist Jack Jones, who wrote a book about him called Let Me Take You Down: Inside the Mind of Mark David Chapman in 1992. Chapman has been eligible for parole since 2000, but has been denied 13 times. His story has been made into movies like The Killing of John Lennon and Chapter 27. We hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for more.